All right. Hey, Facebook, how are ya? My name's Crystal Gray. I'm the creator of the Yoga Goddess Academy and the founder of the Yoga Goddess Collective Facebook group, the awesome, amazing Facebook group. Everybody in there is just so great and supportive. So, today I wanted to share with you three main keys to sequencing a yoga flow. Now, there's obviously going to be a lot of different things that go into sequencing a yoga flow, and especially into sequencing a yoga flow that makes sense, right? So you maybe have been to yoga classes before where, and maybe you don't, maybe you haven't noticed yet, but especially if you start going through a yoga teacher training, you might start noticing where it seems like the teacher kind of just like threw some poses in there, like, oh, it seems like crow would be fun right now, or it seems like king dancer would be fun right now, especially some of these harder poses that really need the body to be prepared. So it's not necessarily, it's not wrong to do that. I never usually say that other teachers are wrong, because there's so many different ways to interpret things and different ways to do it. So there's just certain ways that I like to do things, and I always tell my trainees that if you do things a certain way, just have a reason for it, have something to kind of back it up. So one of the first keys, and I want you to make sure that you stay till the end, because number 3 is the most important to me. And then we will also get into, I'll show you some things that I actually shared with my online yoga teacher trainees this past week. So number 1 is to choose a pinnacle pose. So again, the key with sequencing is that one of the main things is that we don't want the classes to seem clunky. Okay, so again, I don't know if you've been to a yoga class before where it just seemed either choppy, it seemed clunky, like the poses didn't really go well. It didn't seem like there was a rhyme or reason. So one of the ways to create like a rhyme or reason in your yoga flow, and it's okay if you're a student, right? If you're not a teacher yet, that's fine. You can still start practicing creating your own flows. And that'll be really good, because you will then know that the yoga class is exactly what you need. You're getting what you need from your practice. So choosing a pinnacle pose. So again, this will give your sequence a direction. Okay. So it'll give your sequence a direction. The pinnacle pose is like the hardest part of a class, the hardest pose. And so whenever I teach that it's your sequence. You start here, right? When you're planning a class, and then you go like this, and you go up, you come down, and you go like this. So it's kind of like a bell curve. Okay. So up at the very top of the bell curve, that's usually where the pinnacle pose is going to be. Okay. It might be a little bit going down the side, but usually it's somewhere up there. So this is going to be the hardest part of class. Okay. So sometimes you might be doing sun salutations, you're doing flows, you're getting them really warmed up, or yourself, right? And that's the very top. So then you're going to come down a smidge, and then that's a technical term, smidge. And then right there is where you would put your pinnacle pose. So how this helps you in sequencing. So what you'll do is you'll look at your pinnacle pose and you'll think, okay, what body parts need to be warmed up for this pose? And what body parts need to, just be open, stretched? What kind of foundational pieces do you need to add in? For example, if it's a standing balancing pose, it might not be a stretch that you're doing to prepare the body, but it might be Tadasana, right? It might be really building those foundations of how to build a strong foundation like you would in standing mountain pose, Tadasana. Okay, so just thinking of different things that you can do to prepare the body for that pose, or even prepare the mind. So if it's an arm balance, right, and you have to get like really close to the ground in this particular arm balance with your face, that can be scary. So maybe your theme of the day will be something like facing your fears, and maybe you'll be talking about that all the way, throughout. So that's just an idea. So again, you will properly warm up the body. You'll prepare them mentally, physically, and maybe emotionally for the pose. You will naturally choose poses that go together. So the poses they'll just flow a little bit more effortlessly if you are leading towards a pinnacle pose. Okay. That's number 1, choosing a pinnacle pose. Number 2 is to practice the sequence as you're creating it, especially if you're a newer teacher. So I've been teaching since 2006. Okay. So I don't need to do every single like transition now that I would whenever I was a new teacher, but that's because I've done so many transitions. So a transition is when you're in one pose, say warrior one, and you transition to warrior three, which is a standing balancing pose, right? Or you're in warrior one and you transition to warrior two. So it's important to know how to cue your students into that transition. That makes it easier, but you need to make sure that it doesn't seem clunky. So you practice it on your mat before you put it into your class. Now, if you know that it's something that works and that, after a while, it'll just become ingrained in your mind. So you won't have to practice it. You won't have to make sure anymore. But just like yesterday, I had to do that. I was like, I wonder if that would go with that, if they would flow together, because I'd never done it before. So I got up and I tried it and I was like, okay, yeah, that would go together. Or no, it wouldn't. In that case, it did. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you'll be able to be like, yeah, I'm 99% sure that that'll work. So practice it. Practice the transitions. Make sure that it's not clunky. And number 3, the most important one to me, the one that I think is most important is, I should have my husband come in here and do a drum roll. He's a drummer, is stance. Okay, so stance is the number 1 thing that is the most important. Okay, so let's see here. It's for some reason showing up backwards. Let me see if I can flip it around. I think because it's on Facebook. Let me see if I can go to Facebook real quick. Bear with me. Let me see if I can go to Facebook and switch it around. I don't really know how I would do that. Okay, well, you'll just have to look at the pictures, okay? And then I will explain it. All right, I'm gonna grab my stuff here in case I need to rewind or in case I need to erase. Okay, so the first stance. Now, the reason why this is so important is because after you know the stance of certain poses, you will just know what poses will go together, okay? So let's get into what these stances are. I kind of added on to what my teacher taught me. I added on a little bit more, but let's start with closed hip short stance. That's what that says. So you might want to write that down. Closed hip short stance. Now I drew a little mat. Okay. So here's the front foot. It's kind of like kidney shaped. So it goes in. That's like the arch of the foot. Here's the back of the foot. So the arch is on the inside, right? So that's how you would draw feet. This is my first time ever drawing footprints, I think. So, okay, this stance is so there's an arrow here. So you're about, your hip width here. So I like for my closed hip short stance to have my feet hip width. Some teachers might have, front heel in line with the back arch, but for me, and I think for beginners, for most women, I think it's a lot more comfortable to be hip width. Just make sure that you're not going, a lot of times, especially women have this skewed idea of how wide their hips are. So their feet will be too wide. So like hip bone width, right? So that's how far apart you want them. Now, how far apart this way, like, long, that's going to depend on the body, like on your height. But in general, it'll be 3.5 to 4.5 feet. That's how far you'll step apart. Okay. So it might seem a lot shorter than normal. So than what you normally do. The back foot is going to be turned out about 20 degrees. So let's say that this is the back left foot. I think that that's what it looks like for you guys. So the back left foot is pointed up towards the front left corner of the mat, and the front foot is pointed straight forward. Okay. So what poses would fall into this category? Well, the main one, what I think is the main one is warrior one. So again, this is where it might be different than what you're used to. And the reason why I do this is because, again, I've seen so many bodies and I've seen what works for the majority of bodies. And having a shorter stance in warrior one generally is going to feel way better on the low back. One of my biggest things is that I want to keep the low back safe, because what I tell all my students is that that's the place where most back surgeries, that's where they happen, is right above where the sacrum it comes to the spine, right? Connects to the rest of the spine right there. So it's really important that we keep that part of the back nice and long instead of compressed. And if you have too long of a stance in your warrior one, it's going to make your booty pop out, which compresses the low back. Okay. So I like to have a shorter stance so that you can lengthen the tailbone down or tuck the tailbone down, bringing the pelvis into neutral. You're not tucking the tailbone under. Okay. So other poses that go with that would be pyramid pose. Okay. If you don't know what these are, just write them down and you can look them up later. If I get into all that, it's going to take forever. And then revolved triangle. So yes, revolved triangle does not have the same stance as triangle in my classes. Again, because of all of the bodies I've seen and how it makes sense for the majority of people. Okay. And how it's going to feel good for the majority of people. Believe it or not, if you're looking to go into a yoga teacher training or you already are a teacher, most of your students, I'd say 98% are beginners. Okay. Unless you're going into, teach at a studio and it's titled level 2, even then, chances are there's going to be a lot of people who still haven't learned a ton about alignment. Okay. All right. So now let's move into the next stance. That says open hip long stance. Okay. So here, the back right foot is turned in about 20 degrees, but that's because your hips are open towards the long edge of the mat. So yes, it's turned in about 20 degrees, but it's not facing the front top corner like it would be in this one, again, because your hips are open. In this one, the hips are square towards the front of the mat, okay? In this one, they're open here. So think warrior 2, okay? So the front foot's pointing straight forward, back foot's turned out slightly. Or turned in slightly, sorry. Okay, so the length of your stance is longer now. So 4.5 to 5.5 feet. Poses here would be poses like warrior 2, reverse warrior, triangle, and side angle. So why is this important? Okay, because you can flow them together. I can't count the number of times that I've done pyramid to revolve triangle or warrior 1 to pyramid to revolve triangle. They go together easily. Okay. So I do them together a lot. Same thing with this one. So I'll do, warrior 2 to reverse warrior to triangle. Okay. They just go together well. And it makes your class a lot less clunky and it makes the transitions a lot easier if you know this rather than trying to go to all these different stances, kind of like in the same breath, from this breath to that breath, changing the stance. All right, closed hip long. Okay, so this one is, again, let me draw the mat. These kind of look like paw prints. Okay, so here's your mat. So this one, the reason why this looks like a paw print is because that's just a little round circle, because that's just the ball of the foot. Okay, that is not, the whole foot is not down in this one. Closed hip, so that means the hips are facing the front of the mat. Okay, front foot's pointing straight forward. Back foot, you're just on the ball of the foot. The heel is lifted. Okay, so let's think. If it's hard to imagine, what poses would this be? It would be like crescent warrior, sometimes called high lunge, crescent warrior, and revolved side angle stretch. So Parvrita Parshvakonasana, revolved side angle stretch. So that would be the closed hip long stance. All right, next, closed hip wide stance. So both feet point forward towards the long edge of the mat, hips point in the same direction. This would be like wide leg forward fold, Padottanasana, and star pose. I don't really teach that one a lot, but the arms are up. Now in star pose, the feet would turn out more like this. Okay, so goddess pose would work from there as well, but the feet just have to turn out. Okay, but it's pretty much the same stance. You just have to change the feet a little bit. So for example, you're not going to go from like crescent warrior, something with this closed hip long stance, to like a wide leg stance, because it's going to be clunky. It's not going to work. So you have to think about your transition. The next one is Tadasana. So feet together, okay? Or, you know, a couple inches apart. So that would be like Tadasana, standing mountain pose, chair, Urdhva Hastasana, just arms overhead, and half moon A, which is like a standing side stretch, okay? Now I'm really digging deep here. I'm totally made these up, but closed hip, partial wide stance. These are just the different, you know, feet placements that I have people get into for poses. So like crow, malasana, titibasana. I do a lot of mini wide leg forward folds, like at the front of the mat in the beginning of class. Instead of having them do a forward fold with the feet together, I'll bring the feet as wide as the mat. So, you know, you could be facing different ways with the feet. So yeah, those would all work well together as well, you know, going from malasana, yogi squat to crow. So I hope that this helped you. Please, please, please let me know any questions that you have so that I can do a better job, so I can share that information with you as well. Because some of this information is just it's so, you know, second nature to me at this point, and it will become second nature to you at some point too. So don't get discouraged, okay? But I've been doing this for a long time and I've been aware of it for a long time, so it makes it a lot easier for me. Plus I've been teaching it, and you know, whenever you're leading a teacher training, you get just good at some of these things because you teach it, right? So I hope that this helped. Again, number one in, you know, properly and making amazingly sequenced classes would be choosing a pinnacle pose. Number two, practice the sequence or practice those transitions, and stance, knowing what stances all these poses have. So, you know, just kind of go through and choose the poses that you do the most often and try to think about what stance they are. If you have any questions about what stance a certain pose is, let me know in the comments. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining me live. I really hope that this helped. Please let me know if it did. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.